I can sense a hush falling over the crowd. There's something about standing at a podium that makes these things happen. Good evening, everyone. Before I begin, let me extend my gratitude to Eileen Gillooly of the Hyman Center for the Humanities, who invited me to make these introductions, and to the Hyman Center itself for sponsoring this panel, along with so many other extraordinary cultural events. And as we sit here in these sumptuous surroundings of the Casa Italiana, let me also extend a welcome to Vice Consul Isabella Periotta from the Consulate of Italy in New York, who is gracing us with her presence somewhere in this room. My name is Karen Green, and I am Columbia's graphic novels librarian, as well as the adjunct curator for comics, which is, to me, a hilarious title. I've been lucky enough to have initiated both a circulating collection of graphic novels and a growing archive of cartoonists' papers, and doubly lucky to have had the unqualified support of library administration in this quest. And it is as Columbia's advocate for comics that I stand before you. And I'm told, to do a brief plug. I'm also the curator of an exhibition currently in the Rare Book and Manuscript Library, taken from our comics archives, which I encourage, nay, urge you to come see. It's up till January 23rd. But enough about me. It's an extraordinary honor to be asked to introduce these three profoundly talented artists, despite their truly needing no introduction. I will nevertheless proceed to give one. It's a somewhat bizarre honor, however, to be asked to introduce them as they discuss old masters and this idea of the senile sublime, given that they all produced such memorable work well before they were of an age that anyone other than perhaps some of our undergraduates would consider old. Two of them also have Columbia connections, which makes it an even greater pleasure to be here offering these introductions. Art Spiegelman, winner of a 1992 Pulitzer Prize from our journalism school for Mouse, his historical memoir in comics form that is familiar, I'm sure, to you all, was also an instructor here. In spring 2007, under the aegis again of the Hyman Center for the Humanities. His course, Comics Marching into the Canon, was a success that bears repeating. And his influence had a significant impact on the development of the library's graphic novels collection, which was at the time still in its infancy. But his influence on comics as a medium cannot be overstated, from his sojourn as an underground cartoonist pushing the boundaries of the medium to his editorial voice, along with that of Françoise Moulin, on the comics anthology Raw, to Mouse, obviously, and his host of subsequent works, and to his work as the medium's historian. That's not me. Somebody's ringing.
That's the aforementioned Françoise.
Oh, that's her electronic voice. Should I go on? To his work as the medium's historian, critic, and preeminent public intellectual. In addition to that Pulitzer Prize, he's been honored with a Guggenheim Fellowship, with induction into the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame, with the Grand Prix at the annual French Comics Festival at Angoulême, as a Chevalier of the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres, with a retrospective exhibition at the Jewish Museum here in New York, and with a laundry list of additional awards and honors. But so far from resting on his ample laurels, which he is not here to hear anything about, Spiegelman continues to grow and experiment with Hapless Hooligan, his collaboration with the dance company Pilobolus, with the stained glass window he designed for his high school alma mater, and with Wordless, his multimedia disquisition on wordless comics, coming here to the Miller Theater in March 2015. Book your tickets now. Alex Melamid doesn't have a Columbia connection that I'm aware of, but I do have a familiarity with his work going back to 1993, when my brother and I went to the monumental propaganda show mounted at the World Financial Center downtown. Did anybody see that? Oh gosh. Have you guys not been in New York this little bit long? I don't know. It was a really good show. Melamid and his then partner, Vitaly Komar, asked 150 artists from around the world to contribute proposals for what to do with Russia's large supply of Soviet monuments. I recall this show vividly, not only because of the sometimes humorous, sometimes poignant suggestions, but because of what another attendee wrote in the guest book right before my brother and I stepped up to it. His suggestion read, "Save them for next time." A sentiment even more uncomfortable today, perhaps, than it was 20 years ago. Melamid's conceptual art has taken him from those Soviet monuments to people's choice, or the identification of the type of painting most popular with Americans, and most recently to the Art Healing Ministry, now in Chelsea from its original location in Soho, which explores the healing power of art, quite literally applied to the infirm. This project also led to Melamid's appointment as artist in residence at the Queen's Hospital Center. And now finally, to Jules Feiffer. To enumerate all of Feiffer's accomplishments as cartoonist, illustrator, playwright, screenwriter, historian, memoirist would take more time than this evening allows, much less the time allotted to me for introductions, so I'll try to be judicious. Okay, in addition to the 1986 Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning that ties him to Columbia, he has won a 1961 Academy Award for his animated short Monroe, a 1969 Obie for the play Little Murders, and in 1995 was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He wrote and drew the brilliant and influential comic strip for the Village Voice for 42 years and was asked by the New York Times to create its first op-ed comic strip. His 1965 book, The Great Comic Book Heroes, was a groundbreaking work of comics history that, in addition to taking comics seriously as an art form, reintroduced a waiting world to the comics genius of Will Eisner, coincidentally also Feiffer's first comics employer. And his illustration is prolific, most notably for me in the work that first introduced me to him, the timeless classic, The Phantom Toll Booth. And now, as a living example of the night's theme, at the sprightly age of 85, Feiffer has produced a magnificent, complex, and compelling long-form graphic novel, Kill My Mother, which we recently learned, Lord bless him, is the first of a trilogy. And with that, you should all be chomping at the bit to hear from these three legends. And so, with thanks to you all for coming, I turn you over to Alex, Art, and Jules.
I wish I know how to do it. Okay. First of all, I want to demarcate myself from all these graphic artists, you know. I am a fine artist, and I'm very different. And because, you know, the graphic artists, as far as I understand, I don't understand much about graphic art, but they have to think, they have to write something, some plot, to get some drawings according to what is written and stuff like that. We, the fine artists, we don't use our brains. We use our guts. And my last show was called The Art of Plumbing. And you understand that it's some, you know, plumbing and art are connected very closely because the guts need plumbing. How do I do this? You see? To be old is not a nice thing. Okay, I'll do it this way. Oh, got it? Uh-uh. Uh-huh. No, before that. Uh-uh. Before that. Okay, this one. You see, that's how it worked, you know, long time ago. We were young, and we were revolutionaries, you see? Now we're old. And we're revolutionaries. Even more revolutionary than the youngsters, okay? And I'm very proud of it. And, you know, because the whole 20th century was devoted to the cult of youth. So because we believed in the revolution, we believed that we need revolution. We need a big change. And American art after the World War II, the leaders of this art were the Trotskyites, and they were talking about a permanent revolution. We need to shock the public. We need to change every time, you know. Every new show and every new thing should be new. And only the youngsters can deliver. They're wrong, because, you know, traditionally, again, Jesus. Traditionally, it was different. This is the work of Titian, okay? And it's his latest work, the last work. And he died in his 90s, maybe he was 100, nobody really knows for sure. And this is a flaying of Marcius. You see, they skinned the guy. So he has this, before that, okay, wrong. Jesus Christ. Okay, before that he painted very beautiful women. You see the evolution from very realistic to very modern by our standards. The same happened to this great artist who is Michelangelo. He started like that and continued like that. So a real deterioration of mind, you know, leads you to modernity. And modern art is the art of the feeble minds, okay? Either where you're very young or very old. Nothing in between. You see, Michelangelo, come on, guys. And you see deterioration goes on and on. This is a nice lady. Not as nice as the previous ones, but then the end. The guy was totally senile, but you know, and that's what he does. And this looks really more modern and better, let's say. And it's very important, because now there's a show of late Matisse at the Museum of Modern Art, and the critics are raving about this, absolutely raving. That's the greatest show on earth. And this is, see, a next artist, you see, deterioration, you see the deterioration. You see, the young lady is getting, look backwards, you see. This is a young lady, I mean, you see, nice lady, okay, nice lady. You see, nice lady, okay, okay, nice lady. You see, no, sorry, no, nice lady, oh my God, I got it. Whew. And it's getting more and more modern, you know. And then at the end, this guy was totally an Alzheimer, completely. So he was, you know, the assistants were giving him the brush, you know, because he couldn't handle anything, you know. And I think the assistants and the people around him wanted to make money. And you see, Lucian Freud had the handwriting of a 5-year-old, at least judging by a letter he sent to one of his students in 1996, age 74. You see, and now it's 2 from 3,000 pounds estimate. So, but you see the handwriting of a young boy, and that's the young boy, you know. And that's his painting, according to the book, a German book about, you know, children, German book. That's what, but in reality, of course, that was different. That's the young boy. This is my granddaughter. You see? Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. Picasso. That's how it works. As simple as that. That's it. You see? And this is Sight Wombly. $35 to $55 million. Dollars, yeah. You see? And that's, you know, easy to become an old young artist. So you see, it's me, a long time ago, I was younger then, on this, on the playground. Or we build, you know, this modern artists build the sculptures look like, you know, like playgrounds for the adults. You see, this, you know, look through, you know. And that's my work, you know, so it's people, you know, making calisthenics in front of great art. To keep them young. And that's a real artist, you know. This is Gerhard Richter, so it really makes him stronger, you know, and that's a very good picture, you know. So in order to be stronger, you have to run faster, even when you're old, you know. And this, you know, you can do it differently by plastic surgeries. That's the people who consume art, you see. Beautiful ladies, you know, yeah. Yeah, and that's me, actually, you know, I want to, no, okay, doesn't matter. And that's my idea. That's the evolution of modern art. It started with Duchamp's urinal and goes to this incontinence, you see. It was done in 2007. See, it's a Mott 1917, this Melamid in 1907, you see. That's the evolution, you know. So, and with the old people, and that's my work, actually. I appropriated this. I tried to just color this. Yeah. I try not to get out of the slide. Because first intention, but I'm not old enough, you know, so I still can do it, you know, because not everyone. From Michelangelo, died in 88, to Willem de Kooning, died at 92. Great artists of older age have shown the high state of mindlessness that turn out to be what the doctor ordered for the art of the 21st century. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we need, you know. And that, of course, it's very interesting because, you know, on the show, you know who he is, you know. The only one work which was really claimed as the greatest work is the imitation of his child's, you know, Play-Doh sculpture. So he made, from the small Play-Doh, made this huge sculpture, you know. So, I mean, again, it's a cult of mindlessness, you know. The cult of the gut feelings, let's say. And that's what modernity is. And again, as I said, you know, it's all was invented in America by the Trotskyites, by this permanent revolution idea. I think modern art as hoax, you know, is a fraud. And please, you know, join me in understanding this, you know. I know it maybe sounds bad, I mean, original, let's say, but it is, you know. What happened to modernity is that, oh my God, no, I wouldn't say that. I think it's a God's voice. Okay, thank you, and I finish my part, okay?
That's it? Alex, are you finished? Okay, so I got involved in this only because Alex had this idea that I really loved, which happens every 10 minutes with Alex. This particular one was, what we really need is a form of redress, because there's all these awards that go to young painters, for example, like emerging artists. And he said, none of this 30 under 30 bullshit. What we need is 80 over 80. And quite seriously, because a lot of Alex's jokes are serious, what he tries to do is find a way to turn these sort of real, like getting a job as an art therapist at a hospital in Queens just because he had the idea of curing people's elbow pains by projecting Van Gogh paintings onto the elbow. So in this case, what was going to happen, the idea was to set up shows of work by people of a certain age and older. And let that be a way of understanding the work that had been undervalued. Like Picasso's late work was ignored for many, many years. You know, now people looking goes, oh, surprise, he's dealing with sex and death. That's interesting. So it's changed. But the goal was to have prizes for artists before they submerge rather than emerging artists, and see what people are making as they move on in their concerns. You know, this is an exciting idea to me. And it made me try to figure out various things. Oh, one thing Alex asked me to do is to ask for money. If you know any oligarchs, they're now all wrapped up with other projects so they can't support Alex's. He really does want to have awards for submerging artists, and the idea of the first show in this project would be taking an age at random, like 81, and looking at artists from every era, in every style.
So, you know, like 81, I mean, we need a criteria for choosing artists. And the age is the best criteria, I think, because it's a real criteria. 81 is 81, you know. It's like with the money. A million is a million, 81 is 81. So, and in a way, you know, we'll do it, you know, like from different eras, you know, only works done at the age of 81 or whatever, 77. That's what you have to do, and you have to donate. And I know that...
or find a rich oligarch, an American oligarch, to help support this.
And Art, you have a hat.
I do.
Yeah, maybe I'll go with a hat.
That's why I brought it, so you could pass it?
Yes, okay. Can I?
We're going to try to raise 81 cents.
Afterwards, you know, so at the end, okay? You would donate. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
like, I've been thinking about this thing ever since Alex brought it up, and it's actually a very interesting way to relook at stuff I've been looking at all my life, which is what happens to these cartoonist trajectories, you know? And I then had to ask Alex, how old is old? Is it 70 or is it 80? Because I'm pushing towards 70. I'm 67. I just started hanging out with older and older cartoonists so that I could feel young. But he said, I don't know, but you recognize it when you see it, you know? And then trying to figure out what the common denominators are. I'm not sure what they are, but since Alex makes this demarcation between artists and, what did you call us? Graphic? Fine artists, and what are we? We're... I don't know. Okay. The other kind, Brand X. So at some point I met a fine artist, so I brought Alex to meet him. There we go. Because I got very excited about his work. This is a man named Cy Lewin, who's 96 now, living in an assisted living facility in Pennsylvania. And I didn't know he was alive when I was seeking out the rights to his work for this Wordless project I'll be doing at the Miller Theater here in March. I got interested in silent comics and the woodcut novels of Lind Ward, Mazareel, and others. And while looking at that, I found this man whose work was really obscure, a book that came out in the 50s originally called The Parade. He's an artist who has been drawing since childhood to keep up with the urinal theme. He said he changed mediums, but he used to paint on his parents' wall when he was 2 months old. And he kept going this way. And he was born in Poland, moved to Germany. He was born in 1918, was there till Hitler came to power. As soon as Hitler came to power, he booked. He moved to France as a teenager, got to America, amazingly enough, right before the war, went back as one of the Ritchie boys, a group of special ops who were there to use their German language skills for propaganda purposes, translating and whatever. He ended up being at Buchenwald the day after it was liberated. He ended up getting shot at Normandy, painting through his entire life and period. When he came back, he was really depressed. He started trying to work again, and what came out was this suite of drawings called The Parade, inspired by Franz Mazareel. You'll hear a lot more about this in March. This is just to show you that the style is very different from the woodcut novels, if you know Lind Ward's work and others, but telling a narrative in these large pictures informed by a lot of modern art styles. So he still works every day in his studio, which is one bedroom of this old age home. He works in many different styles, ranging from surreal to erotic, realism to caricature to totally abstract. He tends to work in groups where, does this work? No. Is that an arrow? Oh, okay. Can you see that arrow? It's a little small, but yeah. Back there's a part of a picture called Millipede. He makes pictures that he puts together in different orders till there's 1,000 pictures. And the big group that he's been making is ghosts. Painted shrouds with ghosts, some funny, some horrifying. Now, speaking of horrifying, he did this terrible thing after we became friends, which is he was complaining a lot about the arthritis in his right hand at 95. He just couldn't hold a brush anymore. He says the only reason he gets up is because he's curious what he's going to paint that day. And now he just couldn't do it. Eventually, it drove him nuts. What he did was he tried to saw his hand off with the buzzsaw he uses for stretching canvases. Fortunately, he didn't succeed, but he managed to cut all the nerve endings off so that he actually didn't feel any pain in his right hand. It was a pretty grotesque version of an operation. Nor could he use the right hand anymore. And that was baffling because he still needed to work, and he was right-handed. This was his first painting, just putting his right hand up against canvas. Then he began doing things like this. Pretty amazing. His first works were working in sculpture because he could do that with his left hand. So these sculptures of his right hand emerging from the ground are the series that he's been working on, and he continues to make his ghosts and more. Now I figured this is a great example of an old master. He had been a reasonably successful gallery artist in the 50s, 60s, into the 80s. In the 80s, he said, look, art is not about making money. Art is not to be confused with commerce. I'm leaving the gallery system where they tell me which paintings sell, which ones don't. I just need to pursue my muse. So then I talked to Alex about this. He was very interested. But he made very clear the distinction between that kind of art and what we do, us cartoonists. On the other hand, I'm just interested in old age. I always feel something's gaining on me. This from my sketchbook. And I'll show you here something I've been ending a lot of my lectures with because I've been going through a period of great retrospection that culminated in a way in this comics show that I did. So this is my life in 6 pictures. Voila. So I tend to be somewhere around here right now, but I keep looking forward as well as back. It's a little bit like when I was a kid, and I was like 9 or 10 years old. My parents would ask me, and other people would ask me, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I'd always tell them, neurotic. And now I sort of look forward to becoming an old master if I live long enough. So this old master stuff. I started thinking in my medium, who would qualify to me as an old master, and specifically maybe one meeting Alex's definition of losing his mind. Most cartoonists are not allowed to lose their mind. There's too much of it present in the work. We're writers as well as artists, and it requires an incredible amount of organizational ability to make these little boxes together. And you're asked to have some kind of communication with the audience rather than just splaying your innards and leaving them out for an audience to interpret, like the shamanistic artistes. So I thought of Chester Gould as my favorite example. I would have given a lot more, except I'm trying to do this very efficiently so that I can introduce our Grand Master of the evening as well. But here, I won't do all the artists I was considering and thinking about, but Gould is a great example. So Chester Gould, who was born in 1900, started the strip called Plainclothes Tracy in 1931. He had been trying to sell humor strips before that, and his drawing style might have been more appropriate to that. But he was able to find an angle at the beginning of the to-be-continued adventure strip that made Dick Tracy the most popular comic in America, in the front of all of the Chicago Tribune daily newspapers, the front page of the Sunday paper. Here, incidentally, it's a picture of him in his backyard with his buried villains. So it's literally in his backyard. It's literally his buried villains. You take pictures of them, wrap them up, put them underground, and put a little tombstone for each of the famous villains. So it's a man who certainly was death-obsessed. In its heyday, what Dick Tracy managed to do riveted attention by bringing the violence from the front pages of the tabloids into the comics pages. This was a strip that was about blood, as it says in the last panel. It was a strip that's very visceral and clear to understand. Without reading the text, you get a fairly clean sense of the kind of action that's happening. A pair of binoculars falls, they look up, they see a slumped figure, and then they find out that he's bleeding. That was the core of that Sunday. Now, what Gould was what I think of as a blueprint expressionist. Like, the work has a lot in common, if you look at it box by box, with what the Germans were doing in the Weimar era. He may not be a great draftsman like some of the other comics Jules's presentation that you'll be seeing soon. But he really had a great sense of graphic design and composition, and each panel is a kind of painting. Like, if you look at this top strip about the brow, in the third panel, these swimming black shapes are just beautiful shapes. If you look at the brow, a Nazi spy, at the bottom of a Sunday page that I put down below here, you see that he's falling from a great height onto a flag during World War II and is pierced by the flag. This is real cinematic action, like he was taking advantage of movie storytelling. He was also, as well as being a great graphic designer and whatever, he was a pyromaniac manqué. There were more fires in Dick Tracy than in any other comic strip I've ever seen. Every month there'd be a different fire, and he learned more ways of drawing fire than any artist ever could have come up with outside of him. Here what he's done is he's doing penance for having, well, he being, let me just get this going one moment. I just want to get the clock going so I don't take up more time. Jules said he didn't believe I would talk for 15 minutes because I never have. But here what it is Gould had his daughter design a Frank Lloyd Wright house for Dick Tracy, and he couldn't help himself. He sets it on fire, which is what we're looking at here. Feels terrible about it. He can't help himself, though. So here, this is very visceral, very dynamic, very active. You can sort of follow the action again without me reading you each panel. And it gets more and more roiling and passionate and intense. It's amazing that this was allowed to run as a daily comic strip, but it's very clarified and it had good action. The penance is that he burns his hair off looking for Junior inside the fire, his adopted son. And for the whole month after that, there's a bald Dick Tracy. That was the way of apologizing for having burned the daughter's house down. Now, he drops this, but now we're going to look at his work as it moves over time. What I think of with Chester Gould's work is it's like the purloined letter. Like it's hidden in plain sight. This guy is going absolutely senile crazy, but nobody notices. It's on the front page of the Daily News. And over a period of time, all that visceral, lucid artwork becomes something else and quite beautiful but underappreciated. When people talk about Gould and Dick Tracy, they're talking about the 30s and 40s. But by the 60s, here's him burning the house down again. He had built it up, restrained himself, but here in 1969, there's Dick Tracy's house on fire again. But here, although you see what's going on, everything is splayed out. It doesn't have a kind of forward movement. Time, 1:30 a.m., it's Dick Tracy's house. It is, oh no. Anybody inside? I don't know. But you're left moving around these pictures that are more like out on a dissecting table rather than something you're moved through. And the drawing has gotten a lot more weirdly abstract and decorative. Okay? Here's another fire, this one even later. This is from 76. The abstraction is almost complete. Now, as he was moving to more and more abstract and more splayed out, he was also just moving into weird territory. This is a comic from the 60s. All of a sudden, Dick Tracy is no longer a Law and Order crime comic strip. It's a science fiction comic strip. It's taking place on the moon, where people are riding around in garbage cans that they steer with crutches. There's a character called the Moon Maid who comes to Earth and marries Junior. And there's a hidden message in every strip. Hidden somewhere in the daily, there's a message. It's always the same message for a few years. It says, the nation that controls magnetism will control the universe. So it was urgent. He was sending it out in bottles from the Tribune Tower in Chicago. And the strip is now much more involved in like abstract space still. And he's also decided he wanted to be a humorous comic strip artist rather than this kind of hard-boiled guy. So there's strips within strips. For a while there's a strip called Sawdust, which is, I think, written by Moon Maid. And it says here, I'm sorry, I can't read it from there, maybe from here. Boy, Terry's a big fellow. Why shouldn't he be? He was delivered by a chainsaw. So he gets to be a humor cartoonist within his strip. And this is a strip that's made of little dots, that's made by a group of artists. He's kind of annoyed by how little work other old masters like Charles Schultz had. So he has, these strips are just dots, and it takes 4 or 5 artists sitting in a row to do them. And they keep saying, you know, stop it, you're shoving me. Each one each dot has a personality all its own of these little particles of sawdust. He later has another strip called The Invisible Tribe, a comic strip for the blind, where there's nothing on the panel except the balloons. So this guy has gone stranger and stranger, but there's something essential and beautiful about this work, even as it gets more and more diagrammatic. Here, for example, now, is one of the villains no longer like the Brow or Flat Top or some of the other classics. This one is really like a strange one from 70. He's now moving on. He's been doing this since 1931. So now he's got a villain who's called the Pouch. The Pouch is somebody who's very fat. He loses a lot of weight, so he has a lot of wattles, which I think, I don't know where that idea came to the aging Dick Tracy, but a lot of wattles. And what he does with the extra skin on his neck is he puts little snaps in it so he can hide jewels inside the labial folds of his neck. Okay, it's a villain. So the strip gets strange. Here's a strip from very early in Gould's career, 1936, a deathbed scene where Dick Tracy's in a coma. We don't know if he's going to wake up or not. He's beautiful graphics looked over by this nurse that's like a guardian angel of death over here. While he's on his deathbed, he sees a dotted line version of Junior, the spirit of Junior, and it makes him sit up. Then there's a phone call, and then there's this kind of, let's see, it's the hospital. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, oh, oh. Sob, sob, sob. And then it turns out that Dick Tracy's coming around. He's going to be okay. And Junior, who is praying for him, is going to the hospital. That's 1936. A similar deathbed scene between Vera Aldid, the person who did The Invisible Tribe, and his wife, Sparkle Plenty, is over here. Again, this is a pretty clear demo of what I meant, of the pictures kind of just not necessarily having any kind of forward velocity. They're more abstracted and diagrammatic. And he got rid of all that great yes, 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 sob, sob, sob dialogue. It's almost all silent. And it takes a while to move around it and form it into a narrative. So he's really become more and more diffused. And finally, and from one of the last years of the strip, here's one panel. It's on the one hand become very personal and very diagrammatic, and the text goes its way, the pictures go its way, and somehow it all has to take place and melt into your head. Very different than that early strip, and like I said, I feel it's like watching what would have happened to de Kooning if he had been a comic strip artist. Okay, so the thing about our tribe is we're responsible for having a contract that allows us to communicate. So if we're going to develop, we usually develop in the form of making it a little bit easier by streamlining the drawing, adapting the drawing. I mentioned Charles Schulz. As he developed a Parkinson's-like tremor in his hand, he had to change his beautiful sleek line to an ice skater's, from an ice skater's line to a very nervous line, drawing with both hands to make it happen. But he was able to keep doing the strip till a year before he died. So it's part of that thing of the bastard children of art and commerce who murdered their parents and went off on a Sunday outing. So here's art, here's commerce, and comics is the result of that illicit union. Now, I just want to mention that if this was going to go on longer, it would become even more interesting as an event because we even have a few old masters here with us. One I didn't even know about till I saw him before we started talking was Mort Gerberg of The New Yorker. But I did know that Al Jaffe was coming, and Al Jaffe's in the room with us, who's now about 93 years old, if I got it right, 93 years old, and is much more prolific than I am at an age of 67, still doing his mad fold-ins, you know. I thought Alex would appreciate this one because it shows you, what does it say? Which modern artist is most successfully communicating with his audience? When you fold the picture in, you find out it's Charles Schulz and Peanuts. So, still been doing that, and he's been expanding and trying different things, including doing his life story by having somebody write it down, which he should have done himself. It's the only thing wrong with this book. But it tells a rather remarkable journey from America back to the shtetl in Lithuania, and there's over 70 pictures to help that thing happen. And then I think rather wittily, I don't know what the occasion for this was, showing you that that book is basically a kind of fold out of his head, a fold in, that when you open it, his life is inside. That was kind of a touching image for me. Then we also have George Booth, who I think started out senile, so nothing changed over the years, from childhood to old age. And these remarkable, beautifully graphically designed images. And here one that I think George primarily focuses on the single image, which makes him one step closer to a fine artist. As soon as you put lots of boxes together, you lose all credibility. So here you get to see in this one some kind of dialogue about being a vaudeville baggy pants cartoonist and being an abstract drip painter, all in one composition. I know that this isn't the standard, but this is what proves to me that this is one of the greatest comic strip artists in the world in the room with us. This is one of my favorite comic strips ever, called Ip Gissa Gull. I can't read it to you now because it takes so much time, but if you all remember to Google Ip Gissa Gull, you'll not only find the strip itself, but many linguistic papers about it. It's written in a made-up language, as Ip gets a girl, as an ape gets a girl, and it's sublime. So the thing I was realizing about cartoonists is we're working stiffs in a more obvious way. Painters have to kind of hide their traces, either like glorifying the dollar by painting what they love, as Warhol did, which were dollar bills, or here talking to the oldest old master I ever met, Al Hirschfeld, a year before he died, where we got to talk at length. And when I came into the studio, he was working on a caricature of Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh, and I said, "Oh, that looks nice. What's that for?" And he says, "That's not nice. It's drawn from a photograph." I said, "Well, what so?" He says, "You draw from a photograph, it just looks like a photograph," which is true, I guess. And he says, "I don't like doing that." So I said, what is this for? And he says, "It's a commission." I said, what does that mean? He says, "Somebody paid me to draw Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh." I said, "You're 99, your house is paid for. I can't believe you've got to do commissions at 99. He says, "I'm a cartoonist." So we got to do commissions. Now, the thing he was proudest of, incidentally, was not this particular portrait of Jimmy Durante, but the fact that he did do a caricature of Jimmy Durante without a nose. This was a Zen exercise for him. But he also did many of Fred Astaire, and like this beautiful one of Soaring into the Sky, which is my segue into our Fred Astaire of comics, the old master of the evening, Jules. So we were going to have an 80-year-old belly dancer here, but she chickened out. Just to show what happens as artists move on. Jules has been moving on all his life, which is what makes him a real dancer, a pirouettist, who kept adding to his bag of tricks. As Karen was saying at the beginning, it's a long list just to synopsize the way he's adapted his narrative and visual skills to let these things happen. This, in honor of the death of the book, seems to be, or at least the birth of Jules's book as the rest of the book world dies, is a dance to the book of the various kinds of books, which end with the dancer in bed and falling asleep as she tries to read Dickens. So, Jules. Now, born in 1929. Now, the thing about Jules is he did something that I've been maintaining for a very long time, which is every great cartoonist has to reinvent the medium. All it is a co-mixing of words and pictures. But there's a lot of ways to make that cocktail. Some involve pantomime comics even, because the words are embedded in the image choices. Some involve comics the way Jules has done them, that are rather verbose and very rhythmic and well-timed. But each cartoonist has to do that. Jules started out loving the old comics that he grew up with and the comic books that had just been born during his childhood, and returned to that to become a comics historian, one of the most important and first to analyze and look at what comic books had to offer. Because even after comic strips were okay, comic books not so much. And here's his mature style at the age of 12, doing his own comic book. And it led him at the age of 16 to look up Will Eisner and be hired by him as the person who was allowed to sweep up but never touch the boards, because he was too clumsy for that, it was thought. Eventually, when he asked for more money, he became the artist of the back page of the Spirit section. The Spirit is by another old master, Will Eisner, who thought he was making movies on paper. It was more interesting than that, but that's what he said. Now, what Jules got to do eventually after the war was used to script the comics. On the left, you see him scripting a page. in actually what became his mature style in a way. And on the right is the way that got embellished and illustrated by Wally Wood, a great comic artist illustrator. But what Jules had to do as he went out into the world was find a way to use an intelligence that wasn't necessarily appreciated in comic books or anywhere else, and had to find a way of drawing it and approaching what he did. And that became Sick, 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 where he now took the comic books he loved as a kid, like Superman, and psychoanalyzed them. So here, Superman is talking about how he rescues this woman, and basically she just becomes a total ballbuster, saying, what's this compulsion to rescue people? What's with that cape? Are you a transvestite? Do you rescue more men than women in those tight clothes? And eventually he begins to decide, well, he may not be super, but he's better than average, so he puts on a suit, gets a job, and marries the bitch. So that was his take on Superman as he was beginning to be exposed to the war between the sexes and the cross currents in the world around him. The main thing that Jules did, aside from inventing a new rhythm and format for comics, which he really did do, was in a way bringing psychoanalysis to comics, was making him at almost the same time his Bernard Mergendiler, the everyman who wants to get the girl, totally neurotic guy. It was sort of like the Jewish grown-up Charlie Brown. Instead of growing up in the Midwest, he grew up in New York. He got involved with politics. He got involved with women in a way that I don't think Charles Schultz ever did. But what he did was he made things that became thoroughly emblematic, something that yet another old master we don't have time for, Saul Steinberg, referred to as a picture of America as seen from 9th Avenue. He says, the goal of a cartoonist is to make something that once you've seen it, you can't not have seen it. And I think that Jules did this over and over again. Like that one I just showed you about Superman, when I'm talking about Jules with Neil Gaiman, he says, one of the first things that ever embedded itself on my mind was this page that Jules Feiffer did, that gave him an insight into superheroes beyond anything he had ever thought about. He read it when he was a kid, before he even saw Superman, and it embedded for him. This one, Hold Me, about a guy trying to get a little bit of space from the woman who's like acting like a weight around him, saying, give us more. We need more room. You can be free to go your way. I can be free to go mine. And she goes, I'm free to go my way. Yeah. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. And he goes, hold me. And it becomes a kind of, I don't know if any of you remember R.D. Laing and Knots from the 60s. It becomes an absolute paradigm of a relationship and how people act, all distilled into 8 simple boxes. It was deceptively simple. It was a big influence on me. Here's me as 19, what year was that? Yeah, it's about a 16-year-old, I guess. Not good at the maths. Well, I think I was beginning college, must have been 18, doing my version of Jules Feiffer mixed with Arnold Roth feet and bad lettering, but trying to catch some of that. And then also cartoonists that I don't think Jules ever had much use for when we've had arguments about it. Here's Robert Crumb going through his Jules Feiffer period, because Jules was such an important figure for opening up territory that comics hadn't been allowed to go into before, that if you were ambitious about comics, you had to think about it. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, 666 might have been the first graphic novel I ever read, since I'm not a fan of the phrase. Now, here's Jules doing the same kind of approach to the psychological realism, but now trying to emulate the comics that he loved when he was a kid. This for Playboy, finally bringing angles and a certain approach to color and rhythms of storytelling. That's like this stuff trying to come out. It's trying to emerge, and he's suppressing it so he can continue doing this kind of stuff for his weekly bread, which are brilliant. I'm not going to read it because I'm overstaying my 15-minute welcome. But I will point out that in '79 he tried to synthesize how to do his comics and tell a longer story, not by moving to play or movie, but by moving to what by any standards now is obviously a graphic novel. It's a 250 or more page book, 1 box per page, done in a style that's elaborated from, embellished, and freer than what he allowed himself in the strips. And when I said that was one of the first graphic novels, he said, no, the first graphic novel, that was Will Eisner. Well, actually, Jules' wasn't first, nor was Will Eisner's first, but Eisner called it a graphic novel, God help us. And it's a phrase I've never really liked. What I always thought I was doing was making a very long comic book that needed a bookmark and wanted to be reread. It's not a good marketing term. Eisner was a far better marketer than I was. When it came out, it had no place to sit in the bookstore. Now it has plenty of company. But back in the day when it had no company, I just want to thank Jules for having blurbed that first edition of Maus. The publishers were so relieved that somebody would give it credence, because they were, before it was out there, saying, look, we published lots of books that don't sell more than 2,000 copies. We're very proud of them. Why don't you go to the country when the book comes out and take the phone off the hook, okay? It worked out better than all that, but I can't read the quote, but basically it was saying, at once, oh shoot, a remarkable book, if I don't remember it, I know Jules doesn't even remember writing it, but in any case, he's pointing out that it's at the same time a novel, a memoir, and a comic book, and called it brilliant, and I thank him for that. Now, Jules has, in his continual sense of reinvention as an old master, can't afford to go senile, but he can afford to take daring leaps. And this one is amazing, because he wanted to write a graphic novel and get somebody to draw it, and then nobody wanted to draw it, I guess, or he didn't find somebody, and then his publisher said, so you draw it. And he went, I can't draw like that. And then, by God, he now demos that not only can he's done it in a very sublime and complex way. So, the old master of the evening, Jules Feiffer. Thank you.
Thank you and good night. Art, as always, being the sublime scholar of this form, has covered, he said he was going to talk for 15 minutes, and I emailed him saying I've never heard him to talk for 15 minutes, and of course, he didn't.
You were supposed to say, shut up, Artie.
I wouldn't dare. I appreciate too much. One of the things you left out that's crucial to cartoonists, and crucial to every cartoonist that I know, who's worth being called a cartoonist, we are all crazy. It is something somewhat mad about somebody who pursues this field from being a kid, and when you're encouraged, when you're discouraged, when things are up, when things are down. It's the friend of many of us here who are in the business, Erwin Hazen, who is now an older master than I am, 90-something. And Erwin and I would regularly go to the Café des Artistes bar, and we'd start drinking scotches and talking, of course, about the business and ourselves and his past and mine and all of that. And at a certain point in the evening, he looked at me, semi-tears in his eyes, and say, I can't believe I got away with it. And I said, Erwin, that's what we all say. That we all got away with it, because you got away with doing what you love to do and what you have loved to do all of your life when you were a kid and you were supposed to grow out of it. What it's not what grown-ups do. I mean, if you see kindergarten, if you go to kindergarten classes, the art on the wall of public school, you see when a kid is 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, you see some wonderful stuff on the walls, and they're free and they're alive and they're wonderful. And then you go to the second grade and the third grade, and it's less interesting and less wonderful because they've begun to be taught, and and not just taught by teachers, or family, but they themselves become, they lose their inner need and the inner confidence that they had, and they begin to look at the other kids, and they begin to imitate their betters. And one of the things that I said many years ago is that it took me maybe 35 years as an adult to get back to being as good as I was at 7. It is this business. I mean, you talked about Picasso in his 90s, and I remember going to the Picasso Museum many years ago, 25, 30 years, even maybe longer than that, but it hadn't been open very long. And I remember too that the work was kind of dismissed, and he had been very old, and it wasn't very, and they were these Picasso sketches and drawings when he was 90, and I thought, my God, it's pure essence. I mean, this is, and if you look at the work of Al Hirschfeld as he got older and older, the decorative stuff was going away, and it too gets reduced to essence, and that's what's the interesting thing about age is that finally you get to know what in some ways you've always known but never been able to get at, which is how to do the damn thing. Your whole life is just a learning process. And part of that learning process is also an unlearning process, where you get rid of the stuff that you used to think was important. You get rid of the stuff that gets in your way and you didn't know what you're getting in your way. You are continually learning how to do it, not just getting better, but you're learning how to do it from scratch. Every day becomes a process of starting all over again, of learning how to do it for the first time. And I mean, for me, the thrill of discovering the graphic novel game in this, and going noir and doing all the things that Kill My Mother, which started as a kind of a lark. But in the beginning, here's what happened. I got old. I entered my dotage, and I was in my late 70s, and I was teaching a class at Stony Brook Southampton College, and I couldn't really take the city anymore, for some personal reasons, but also because physically, I had walked all of my life all over the city. I walked everywhere. I couldn't walk anymore. I couldn't breathe anymore, and I couldn't hear. I had written plays for years, and I couldn't hear the plays that were my models, and I couldn't hear my own plays. Every reason I had to live in the city came back to mock me and laugh at me, because all the pleasure of walking around the Upper West Side, all the pleasure of going to plays, all the pleasure of walking around the Met or MoMA, all of that was gone because it was hard. It was just every inch of being in the city, being around the city. So when I decided to get out, and because I was teaching at Stony Brook, I had a house up in Martha's Vineyard, but it was impractical. Although I loved the vineyard, and been there many years, since the mid-'60s. It was impractical for me to decamp to the vineyard because I was still working and I had to be around New York, and airplanes were very, very expensive to fly, and it just didn't make any sense. But living out in Long Island, I began to rent, and then it became my home. And then when I was there, I thought, okay, I'm not a playwright anymore because I can't hear. And I'm doing children's books, but that I like, and I love the children's books I did. The picture books, one came out last year called Rubicon Dance, about a dancing cat. I finally figured out how to get dance into a kid's book. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And since I love narrative forms, I decided I would try to write a potboiler, some kind of private eye thing. And I started on it, and I was working on it for a couple of days, and I said, this is boring the hell out of me. So I thought, well, maybe if I add cartoons, maybe it won't be a potboiler written in a Pulp Fiction sort of way. Maybe it'll be what they now call a graphic novel, certainly a form that I read, I followed, but never thought of myself as being part of that business. Art talks about me reinventing a form. I wasn't trying to reinvent anything. I was just, primarily with the Feiffer strip of all those years, I was using my rage, my anger, and my inability to be a successful commercial cartoonist and get a newspaper strip published. I was using all of that in order to, I hoped, overthrow the government. which over the years I managed to do with very mixed results. And since overthrowing the government didn't crack out to be what I wanted it to be, I felt, as we entered this period that we are now in, the Obama age and now the almost post-Obama age, I began to lose the public sense, the public desire to change things. I thought I'm too old to be in this game where I've shot all the things that I thought had changed, slipping back to what they were before I and so many others who came along and worked to change things. So we have a Civil Rights Bill and a Voting Rights Act, and that's being taken away by the Supreme Court and so-called voter fraud. And we're going back to the same questions of race and racial animosity and race war that was around in the 50s and the 60s and back then in the 20s and over and that I remember when I was a kid and read about the Scopes trial in Dayton, Tennessee in the 20s, and about evolution. I thought, well, thank God that's over. That fight is over. And the fight has just begun. It's going. So I lost interest in commenting on politics because all of my comments on politics in terms of my work was about affecting change, being part of something, some movement, some this, some that would help change the society. When I came around in the 50s, it came out of my work in the Army. I got drafted into the United States Army in 1951 and discovered hate. That the rage that was in me as a nice Jewish boy in the Bronx was always submerged by all the people who were my targets, but they were doing it for my own good. My parents were doing terrible things for my own good. My teachers were doing terrible things for my own good. Everybody who was giving me bad advice was doing it for my good. And I understood that these people were not being malicious. They were just wrong, but I couldn't unload on them. But the Army wasn't doing anything for my good. They were trying to turn my personality and turn me into a cog in a machine when I was barely a human being in the first place. And as they picked away at who and what I was, I started picking away at them as a form of survival. And I began to think of some way I could comment on my military rage in a way that wasn't a polemic, that didn't put people off, that got the anger that I felt, but did it in an entertaining way. And I remembered that Will Eisner, who was my hero as a boy cartoonist, would do these occasional comic book for adults, spirit stories. In the spirit, where there'd be narrative in the drawing, and sometimes it'd be in verse. So I started to fool around with a 4-year-old kid who got drafted into the Army by mistake and writing it in a narrative form. And I began it in 51 after I got into the Army a few months, and I was doing something I had never done before, and nobody had really ever done before, so I was inventing this as I was going along, and it took a long time to take this work, which seemed, when it was finally done, very simple, very straightforward, very itself, and no big deal. But it took me 3 years to learn how to do it and throw things out. And then once it was written, the text that was written, it took forever for me to figure out how to draw it. And so all of this, which was a way of using up my anger in a direction that would be accessible to people, which wouldn't drive them away, that would be a form of entertainment as well as giving a message, became my life. And that life has been very effective and very satisfactory and quite wonderful for me up until I exhausted the possibilities of that kind of life, whether it was in the comic strip, Feiffer, or whether it was in the plays or movies. It stopped being, the point had been made. I had made the point. I had talked about all the things I that meant something to me. And there I was out in the Hamptons trying to figure out what's next. And so I started fooling around with this. First it was going to be hack work, and then it became serious. And I found myself going back to working in that form that I had given up as a kid because I couldn't draw like Milton Caniff, because I couldn't draw like Will Eisner, because I didn't have the power of the brush that these guys had, because I couldn't do details, because I couldn't do backgrounds, because I don't know what anything looks like. I know I can draw anybody in any pose, but if I have to put clothes on them, I don't know what clothes look like. I don't know what a chair looks like. I mean, it's maybe something dyslexic because I have no sense of direction. When I leave here, I'll walk into the wall, so I began to, and because, as Art said, because the publisher said, you try to draw it, I began at 80 to fool with a style and work that I had never tried before, and at 80 I had learned how to do it. Talk about late developers. And I did 148 pages of art, and every page of that book, Kill My Mother, was terrifying to me. Terrifying. Because I knew that I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't. And I would do layouts on a sheet of paper and then transfer it to the finished page, and it would change itself because I had very little to do with it, and it would reshape itself and relay itself out, and that became the process of how the book got done. It took over 2.5 years because I'm old and I got pneumonia twice, but also I got so exhausted by the terror I felt at every page that I just would take a break and occasional drink, and the book got done. And then by the time it got done, even before the extraordinary reception it got, I knew this was going to be the rest of my life. That I had found my future by connecting back to my past, to the days of old comics that I loved, to the days of old movies that I loved, to all of this stuff that meant so much to me before I wanted to overthrow the government, to the days of Double Indemnity and the Maltese Falcon, but also Roy Crane's Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy, these adventure strips that meant so much to me as a kid, to Kniff's Terry, to Eyes in the Spirit. All of this I had learned how to roll up into what I know how to do, and it's my ongoing art form. I'm going to read something to you to show you how it works or how it doesn't work, how it evolves with me being in minimum control. When you do one of these books, and I'm working on the second, the Kill My Mother series is now a trilogy. Part 1 started in the first book in 1931. 1933, with Ginger Rogers singing "We're in the Money" from Gold Diggers of 1933. And at the beginning of the book, Elsie, the mother, and Annie, her daughter, are having a fight. She's the mother Elsie is the mother that Annie wants to kill. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that their father was killed just a couple of years ago. Sam, who's not in the book, but is the presence in the book and the spirit of the book. And several reviews said that he's the dog who didn't bark, that he's not there. And I decided that the next book, the second book, would actually be a prequel and show how Sam gets killed. And in that, so I wrote the text, and I wrote it in the form of a comic book that writers who don't draw, you get the thing typed up, you write it, and I dictate to a typist, and then there's a script. So to show you the process, do we have the time for this? To show you the process, this is Sam and his wife Elsie in bed at night. And Cousin Joseph is this strange presence who starts the book on page 2, I guess it is, and appears full figure on page 2, and is never seen again in the rest of the book. But is but is the engine behind the book. In the script that I wrote and sold, the chapter is called Chapter 12, Sam and Elsie. Sam and Elsie in bed, Sam with his arms around her. Elsie, I don't know what to do with Annie, that's their daughter. And we have met Annie in the first book, Kill My Mother. Sam and Elsie as before. Elsie says, the more you're away, she thinks I'm the worst mother who ever lived. And you're the greatest father. Sam, it's her age, they'd get over it. Panel 3, as before, Elsie says, you got a phone call when you were gone. I didn't know you had a cousin Joseph. Sam eyes widen, he looks startled. He sits up in bed and he lights a cigarette. Sam says he's not supposed to call here. Elsie says, I thought I knew your whole family. Elsie lifts herself slightly, looks at Sam. Elsie says, who's cousin Joseph? Sam smokes, stares straight ahead. Sam says, nobody. The close-up of Elsie. She says, he has a slight accent. Am I crazy? Or does it sound German? Close-up of Sam avoiding Elsie's stare. Elsie, Sam, do you have a German side of your family that I don't know about? Sam, smoking, avoids Elsie's stare. Sam, don't worry about it. He won't call again. Now, that's a perfectly good scene for a comic book that I wrote until I got to doing it the other day. And by that time, 35 pages into the book, I thought, this is not enough. I have to tell something more about these people and their relationship and how it works and build this. So I started 2 nights ago at about 1 in the morning. Instead of having them in bed and seeing them, I did mostly a chapter, which is going to run 2 pages, in black pages, and it's called Lights Out. And we see only the dialogue balloons. And Elsie says, Sam, and then second panel, she says, what are you thinking? And Sam's voice says, you're a funny kid. You're always asking me that. And Elsie in the dark in the third panel says, and you never give me the answer. And Sam says, sure I do. My answer is I don't think. And then Elsie says in the next panel 4, in the dark, that's not an answer. And he says, it's my answer. And in panel 5, Elsie says, Sam, everybody thinks. And Sam says, and what good does it do? And then panel 6, Elsie says, I wish I knew what to do with Annie. I think about her all the time. And Sam says in the dark, she'll grow up, she'll meet some guy who won't put up with her guff, she'll be fine. And Elsie says, the more you're away from home, the more she thinks I'm the worst mother in the world. And Sam says, and you're and Elsie says, and then the next panel, and you're the best father. And Sam says, girls are like that, Elsie. And Elsie says, still in the dark, is that what you think, Sam? And Sam says, look who's trying to be cute. And Elsie says in the next panel, which is the next page now, little me, never. And then after a pause, you got a phone call late last night. I forgot to tell you. And Sam says, tell me now. And Elsie says, still in the dark, I didn't know you had a cousin Joseph. And suddenly the lights go on. And Sam is sitting up in bed, and he's looking at her. And Elsie says, Sam? And Sam lights a cigarette, and he says, he's not supposed to call here. And Elsie says, I thought I knew your whole family. Who's cousin Joseph? Next panel is silent, as she's looking at him, he's looking straight ahead, smoking. Next panel, she says, Sam, and he says, he's nobody. And she says, he had a slight foreign accent. And then she says in the next panel, do you have a German side to your family that you never told me about? And he says in the last panel, don't worry about it. She says, Sam, he says he won't call again. And that is how this thing develops. That I'm on the trail of something. This is some organic, continually fluid organism that reshapes itself and demands that I do things that I hadn't intended to do, but that there's this wonderful sense of simply following the lead of what the paper tells me to do whether it's the layouts that completely change when I do the finished art, or the writing, which changes and changes, so that by the time the book is finished and turned in, it won't be what the publisher bought. And and my assumption is it'll be considerably better and denser and more complex, because that's where it goes. I mean, and I'm just following it. And that's what I love about this late life learning curve. That the best thing that ever happened to me was being a slow learner, and I'm now having more fun than I've ever had in my life doing this work. And I want to thank you all for asking me here.
I thought you were going to show all these slides we had here. I was trying to, I think I should jump up and show them. But one thing that's really interesting about the page you just said is one thing I had to squelch, I don't know if I still have it, was yes, this page of mine might be the quintessential Feiffer page, and you sort of cannibalized it for the new work. And I love this page. It's my example of minimalist comics that tell you so much about what comics are. So before we take a few questions, maybe I had no idea you were going to go here, but if you don't mind, do you want to read it or should I?
It's a couple in the dark. First panel. Oh God, oh God. Second person. It's wonderful. Oh God, it's wonderful. First person. Dear God, dear God, dear God. Second person. Dear God, God, God. Third, slowly though. Oh God, God, God. 3 silent panels. Bottom page. Joyce. Joyce, are you all right? Wonderful. Me too. Wonderful. Just wonderful, she says. Black panel. Joyce. And she says, yes, Bernard. He says, Joyce, I love you. Joyce? He says finally, are you crying, Joyce? She says, yes, I'm crying. Why did you have to?
Oh, Bernard, why did you have to spoil it?
Yep.
So to me, this is the essence of comics, because one thing that, I mean, I loved hearing Jules say just now that you don't know what anything looks like, because that's been my problem as a cartoonist as well. Solved by Google Images, actually. For you, it was solved by Turner Classic Movies.
And Google, too.
But here, what I really love is that one of the influences on Jules was not just old movies and old comics, but also very much, as you told me, old radio. When radio drama existed, he said, like, everything in comics and everything in radio was about timing. And that's why Jack Benny was this master. Yes. And he said, when he's trying to work out this page, I tried one black panel, that didn't work, so I tried 2, then 3, then 4, and I realized it had to be 3. And then after you've seen it 3 times, you just need 1 the next time. Because this, to me, was one of the essences of comics, which is comics is time turned into space. And this is like sheet music for time. And talk about minimalists, like Joyce and Bernard are each turned into just like a stick, which is an abstraction of a speech balloon. And the suppleness of comics is that the lettering and the drawing are so interconnected, right? So that when they say, oh God, 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 it gets softer and softer, the lettering gets smaller. The lettering becomes the drawing in this thing. And when, you know, it's just the angle tells you a lot. When it's God, 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 you just have the lettering and the stem thrusting into her. And it's all done with the most minimal possible means, and it's a fully realized comic. I mean, you know, the Jules could draw from other pages in Playboy and in the 666 strip, but here it's pulled down to an absolute essence, and I'm glad you've been able to find another use for such a great way of working. Should we take some questions?
Yes, I was going to say that.
Why don't we bring Alex back, and the 3 of us use these chairs that we didn't need.
Shall we?
As the old master, you're supposed to sit in the middle.
I'm supposed to sit in the middle? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
assuming anybody has any questions now that we've gotten into position.
I have a question. First, I want to ask you if my question is phrased too long, stop me. First, I wanted to say I was amazed by Mr. Feiffer trying to change the world with cartoons, because I'm sure you cannot change world with cartoons, you can change it only with one-liners. And now actual question. It's very easy to draw great cartoons. I'm talking about cartoons, not strips. It's very easy to draw a great cartoon if you're a great artist. But the trick is how do you draw a great cartoon if you cannot draw? Sometimes I have good cartoon ideas or a great caption, but I cannot draw, so I have to wear it, and it's quite a burden. And you see, once a friend of mine, he barely can draw. He drew a cartoon at my idea, and it was equal to Willem Steig cartoon of What a Woman. So my question is, where it's possible to find somebody who would draw cartoons that I don't need to wear them, and I have like 5, 6.
Jules couldn't find anybody to draw stuff. You're just going to have to learn to draw like Feiffer.
That's a good answer, thank you.
What a marvelous presentation, and what a great honor to get to be here, to hear you all speak. When I was a kid, I used to love Mad Magazine. You said that Al Jaffe was in the audience.
It's hard for old masters to get up, but he's in the front row.
Jaffe's in the first row, George Booth is in the second row. It don't get better than that, though.
That was my question, if you would introduce these wonderful artists. Thank you, thank you.
I mean, this topic of old masters is such a rich one. I don't think we even tapped it yet, you know? And what's interesting to me is I'd never looked at these cartoonists in terms of their birth and death dates. And I'm going, oh, he wasn't such an old master. He died at 67.
67 was old then.
I know, but like, it was kind of a shock to have to figure out that like, oh, he died at 30, so middle age must have been 15.
How old are you, kid?
67.
Ah!
That's why I have those cartoons of old man death in my sketchbooks these days. But I was interested in the fact that among your mentors, let's say, there's Eisner, who reinvented himself at about 60 plus, in his late 50s, to stop doing first this spirit thing, which was a real revolution in comics. And although the best ones were written by Jules, I found out since, quite seriously.
Well, no, not quite.
Well, that's because you have kids' nostalgia for the pre-war stuff. But then invented himself as a businessman artist, using his cartoons as educational tools to teach soldiers stuff and to do comics for the AMA. I hated that stuff too. And then finding that he was inspired by underground comics, but didn't like all the sex and violence. So started doing something else with that, and lo and behold, the graphic novel. But then among your other mentors was the person I just put up here, Steig, who also had to reinvent himself. After having been first a successful gag cartoonist in the Ashcan School, doing these little gutter snipes.
Small fry.
Small fry.
The New Yorker in the 30s.
And then the work got interestingly abstract eventually into like infused by modernism of Paul Klee and other artists to see what you could do with a cartoonist vocabulary.
And psychoanalysis.
Absolutely, yeah.
He had his own orgone box.
And then went on to totally drop all that stuff to become a children's book artist with a very free painterly kind of children's book art. Then another one, less known perhaps, is Robert Osborne was another person who I think gave you courage to continue to find your way as somebody who's going to burn down the world.
That's a really good example of Osborne.
That's all I had, yeah.
Osborne was doing ferocious political cartoons, commentary. Not, they didn't have a caption, but they were illustrations for the New Republic, which was much more liberal and left at the time, back then in the 40s. And then doing still brilliant, but more conventional stuff for Fortune magazine, where he made him a living. And And his line was so free, so alive, and so special that I tried like crazy to copy him. There's so many artists I wanted to be who weren't me, because the only one whose work I didn't really like at that time was myself. So I wanted to be Osborne. I wanted to be Walt Kelly. I had given up any dream of being Kniff or Eisner because I couldn't do that stuff. But these other artists, I could learn. The other thing is that you do this in all areas of life, in art. You see the work of somebody like Steinberg in his revolutionary period, and Steig in his early revolutionary period. And what they do is give you permission. They open the door. There's some kind of thought balloon that says, a light bulb goes on in your head, and says, I didn't know I was allowed to do that. I didn't know, without Lenny Bruce, I wouldn't have known that I could write Carnal Knowledge. Lenny on a nightclub floor instructed me that it was okay for me to talk dirty and to talk dirty and go into the ins and outs of real relationships of men and women, as opposed to the fake way that our literature at the time was exhibiting it. So Lenny, in his nightclub act, gave me permission to write Carnal Knowledge, as it gave, I'm sure, Philip Roth permission to write Portnoy's Complaint.
Well, your weekly comic strip gave Matt Groening permission to find himself, Linda Barry, and in the Daily Comics, Trudeau, a whole new rhythm and way of working. And it's inspired by this weird tradition that grew up for a very brief period of the not-so-funny cartoonists, the ones who were drawing in ways where they were peeking over to the other side of the fence where Alex lives, of what are these painters doing? How do they make marks? What ways do they draw? Where in some ways, like to an untutored eye, those drawings are not as good as Milton Caniff's drawings or Wally Wood's drawings or whatever, but they move much closer into what modern art is. So I always thought of that as a certain school of the smart cartoonists who didn't know what things looked like.
But I'm interested, did you drink a lot at that time?
Did I drink a lot?
Did you, all the company, all these people you're talking about, did they drink a lot?
I don't know if these people drank a lot. I drank a lot.
You drank a lot, yeah? And what do you drink?
And when this party is over, I'm going to drink a lot too.
Really? And what do you drink?
Huh?
What do you drink?
Well, in those years, I was drinking martinis. If you were an angry person and you want to get angrier.
Vodka martini or gin martini?
And also, end relationships very fast. Just drink a lot of martini.
A vodka martini or gin martini?
A gin martini.
Gin martini.
I've outgrown all of that.
I still drink.
You still drink?
Uh-huh.
What do you drink?
Mostly Jim Beam.
Jim Beam? Well, that was Sinatra's drink.
Oh, okay. Now I know.
We're doing it your way.
Yeah, right.
When Jules was trying to explain why he didn't like Crumb's work, which I thought was this other give permission revolutionary moment in comics, he said, well, I didn't like that whole counterculture, all that stuff with pot. If it was about booze, I would have been there.
That's my theory, when American art was really powerful, people were drinking a lot, alcohol. When they switched to marijuana, so the art went down, so because, marijuana makes you weak, unlike alcohol, which makes you strong.
It's,
Hi.
yeah, well, let's see. Was Tolstoy a wild drunk? I don't know.
No. None of them were real good drinkers. No.
War and Peace was done in a 130-day binge. Very few people know that.
Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just love the dialogue. I just have a question, though. You've mentioned the old masters and their success at being able to essentially experiment and be successful at their experimenting because they feel more liberated or freed at the age that they are, in an older age. Why do you think that experimentation is so much more successful at an older age than, say, for example, experimenting in the middle of one's career?
I think it takes a lifetime to learn how to play creatively. And, I've always thought of what I do as a form of play, because I never was any good at games. I was not athletic. I couldn't play cards because I could never figure out how to do it. My brain doesn't work that way. Was never any good at word games. What I did was play on paper, and I just kept playing, and I'm playing still. And as you play, it opens doors.
But also, being old doesn't mean necessarily being successful at this stuff.
What about being young?
It can lead.
What about being young?
If you're 4 years old, you're a genius. After that, it gets harder and harder and harder. The artist, he didn't live long enough to be an old master that I keep thinking about in this context is...
Well, you got Steinberg up there, which is extraordinary.
Yeah, but here I'm looking at Philip Guston, who at the height of his real success as an abstract expressionist, one-time close friend of Jackson Pollock, just dropped the whole damn thing, you know, because he got bored. You know?
But I think he was a terrible artist, and both periods, on my point.
But Alex says that about anybody. When I talk about Picasso, he's not a bad cartoonist.
Philip Guston was bad, and I mean,
All right,
either
but
an
anyway.
abstract artist or a realist artist. But the point is, I think, you know, old artist is a time thing, you know. Young artists at the time, because it's not only our own age, but the age of our lives, you know. That's very important, you know. So the time of old artists has come, not because they're so different from the young artists of the past, but because it's the whole period, you know. I think modern art, as we know it, is doomed, you know. It's at the finished stages, you know, at this death throes, you know. Because, you know, it started as a very young thing, and now it's moving to the old age, you know. From the age of vigorous men, you know, using the urinal, to the people using this incontinence bottle, you know. So that's the evolution of modernism, you know, and it can be stopped and should be stopped at a certain period, because we cannot live that way.
Alex's last show has a working version of the urinal up on the wall. It's collaborating with a
because we
plumber.
need to reconnect, you know, to this, you know. I think art is a cancer of our society. Because we look at art, you know, as a holy place, and the world around is our enemy. I think the reason for the world bad about us is its culture, and its culture is its art, you know. We are wrong. A great Russian philosopher and a revolutionary, Herzen of the 19th century, he said, "We think we're the doctors, but we are the disease."
Thank you.
Is there such a thing as a cartoonist's block, like a writer's block?
I live on it.
You live on it. I mean, in the middle of a graphic novel, I can get an idea. Maybe you have to pause and stop for a while for the right, you know, thing to come along.
There are any number of times. It's not so much block; it's exhaustion.
It can be block. Trust me.
It's resistance, but also what we call block. You know, it's not as if we are the artist, the person, is in control of what he or she does. It's some kind of collaboration with that inner thing that controls you, that makes your art. It's not up here. Good art doesn't come from up here. It comes from somewhere else. And that somewhere else may decide to go on vacation. Time for a holiday. You may have a deadline next week, but I'm going away. Sorry. And then you can't work or don't want to work or don't feel like working. And that can go on for days. It can go on for months. And then one day you get up and say, I'm working. And you go back. And I mean, this is all sleight of hand. It's a magic act. And the notion that anybody understands how it really works and can explain how it really works is a charade. You can't do it. You just have to, and when you surrender simply to those forces you can't control and let them have their autonomy and you just go along with it, that for me is the game I play. I play with these unseen forces, and they tell me which way to go, and I go, and sometimes I go in another direction, and we go back and forth that way. And a lot of it is screwing up. A lot of it is failing. But But failure is a very good thing. I mean, the notion that we should strive not to fail, I think we should strive to fuck up as much as we need to. It's the only way you learn.
Or as Beckett said, fail better. For me, it's like I don't work when I'm feeling good. It's like I'm feeling good. Why would I want to work, you know? And so the work doesn't happen. And then I'm feeling good, but then after a while I feel terrible about not working. And that gets worse and worse until I get really depressed. And when I get super depressed, then I start working because it's the only way to climb out. And that's my cycle, usually. The only thing I wanted to say about this graphic novel business, that in the middle of a graphic novel, I never want to be in the middle of a graphic novel again, ever. This is something I admire, that Jules in his old age has the optimism to start a graphic novel, because my experience with it was it took me 13 years. And I've seen a lot of graphic novels now. There's amazing things happening, but there's also a lot of stuff that's expanded just to fill it up. The people who draw more facilely are saying, oh great, he's going downstairs. I'll have 12 pages of him going downstairs. For me, it's like open a door, out the door at the bottom, the stairs are over. Jack, what else have you got to say? Because for me, comics are what Jules was doing most of his life, which was the art of compression. How much can you put into a very small, compact space? How many ideas can you get to explode inside somebody's head? So recently, what I've been trying to do, actually, is move just in the opposite direction from Jules, which is because I did a page for the Washington Post a few years ago, and the young editor was really excited, and he said, this is fantastic. We've never had a graphic novel in the Washington Post before. I said, it's one page. He said, yeah, and we've never had one before. I said, you know, you should get out of your section and look someplace else in the paper. We've had a few now and again. But it did inspire me in retrospect to think that I'd love to do, by the time I croak, a bunch of great one-page graphic novels.
Maybe, you know what I'm thinking, maybe there's an age of optimism, only when you're very young or very old. There's a two, you know, in between there's a suffering and stuff like that. And on both ends, there's just happiness and a rosy.
Well, you also, in the middle, there's that thing called life that goes on.
We're close to you, so we're not in the middle, I'm sorry.
You get a family, and there are relationships, and then there are ups and downs, and there are kids to educate. One of them is in the audience tonight, my beautiful daughter, Allie. And, oh, she walk out?
She walked out? Uh-oh.
Okay, so we should probably wrap. If Hallie left, we should probably all wrap up. But if there's one last question, we'll take it. Otherwise,
everything is clear now.
Okay, we've solved that problem. Thank you.